This time interested Choi Han was about the upcoming journey. A few more days, and they would reach a place. Kale started explaining to Choi Han about the city at this halfway point. The next city is called Puzzle. It's the halfway point of the journey. After leaving the Hennatus territory surrounded by many mountains, the road from this Viscount's domain to the capital was very smooth. Choi Han listened silently to Kale, then mentioned the strange incident he saw. Actually, on the way back, Choi Han went to the mansion to check. Everyone looked so panicked. There were soldiers and knights leaving the village. Kale guessed that those soldiers must have gone to report the news to the Psychovenian. Choi Han also added that the secret exit they used to go was completely destroyed. Even the surrounding area was similar. Everything was turned upside down. Kale wasn't surprised. He knew the culprit had done this. It was that dragon. Anyway, fortunately no one died. The dragon was young and in a state of fear. It was afraid that someone would come out from there, so it burned everything down. By the way, to destroy the magic objects that used to control it, because it is sensitive to mana. It seems that the dragon is only 4 years old, but it is quite intelligent. Choi Han sighed. It turned out that this was the reason why he felt a huge amount of mana at the scene of the incident. It seemed like Venian's men paid a big price when they thought that the dragon was small and weak. Everything was resolved. Kale immediately dismissed him, but his curiosity arose. He wanted to know what Choi Han was going to do today, so he knew Choi Han was going to help Beecrox. Kale was delighted and hurriedly continued. Oh, it looks like you're already close, huh? At this time, for the first time Kale saw Choi Han making a puzzled expression. Choi Han resolutely replied, No, not at all. Is that so? You can leave. Kale replied with a puzzled expression. Choi Han lowered his head like nothing and headed out of the room. Kale ordered one more thing when Choi Han was opening the door. On the way out, tell Hans to bring the wine up for me. Yes. Choi Han widened his eyes in panic and turned to look at Kale. Kale calmly looked up at the clock. 7 a.m. He replied cheerfully. Didn't you know that I drink alcohol to sober up? Going downstairs, seeing Choi Han dumbfounded on the stairs, Kale looked at the direction he was looking at. The vice-captain with a neat appearance as if he had never drunk yesterday was talking with a serious face to someone. It was one of the knights who were knocked out by Choi Han yesterday at the mansion. Kale approached, patted Choi Han on the shoulder, startled him, and then he began to said, He shouldn't have been able to function properly for about a day, but he recovered faster than I expected. I've already underestimated others. I'll hit them harder next time. Kale turned around to avoid Choi Han. As expected, he was the kind of main character who would destroy everything for his own justice. Kale sat at the table and was filled with worry. The old owner took a bottle of wine and approached. Young master, I brought you the wine last time. Old man, the more I look at you, the more I have this thought. Yes. Kale laughed and said to the old man who was getting tense. You are a very good seller, I am praising. This wine is really suitable for sober up. Kale picked up the wine bottle and drank it up. And then, he glanced at the vice-captain. The vice-captain was still talking to the knight. Yesterday we had a party to relieve everyone's stress. After drinking, everyone went to rest. No one left the convoy, so I don't understand why Viscount's knight came here to investigate us. It seemed that the knight of the Marquis family introduced himself as a knight of the Viscount family. At the vice-captain's sharp gaze, the knight smiled but replied with a serious face. Yesterday the Viscount's mansion was broken into, and some items were lost. We just wanted to see if you have suffered the same thing or not. Stole what? Oh yes, it was true that he stole the dragon. Kale agreed and took the whole bottle of wine and drank it. At that moment, he made eye contact with the knight who was talking to the vice-captain. What are you looking at? The knight immediately lowered his head and stopped glancing at Kale. The vice-captain saw that, cleared his throat and frankly defended. If our young master doesn't drink wine early in the morning, He will be uncomfortable all day, so he's just drinking. It is drinking to sober up. Our young master is using alcohol to relieve the amount of alcohol he drank last night. The knight at this point no longer suspected that Kale's people was responsible for the theft, so he quickly left. He must be thinking how a trash like Kale could do such a thing like that. Who would have thought that an aristocrat who received orders from the royal family but drank alcohol while on the road like that was a normal person? That way, even if the Venian knew about this, he wouldn't suspect Kale because he knew the mysterious organization and the Hennedeses had no relationship at all. Kale breathed a sigh of relief, asked Ron to go get him a glass of lemonade to sober up. His heart couldn't help but gloat. Even if they go in the direction of the clues that was left, they can't find the culprit. Venian will go crazy. Kale and his convoy continued their journey to Puzzle. Are we going camping today? Kale nodded when asked. Yes, starting today we will camp along the way. To get to the puzzle as quickly as possible, they only have this way to speed up. Kale looked outside the carriage and thought about the plot. The vitality of the heart. That is the name of the ancient power that will strengthen the indestructible shield. The power that focuses primarily on regeneration and restoration of vitality. That's reason why Taylor Stan looked for it. Taylor Stan discarded eldest son of the Marquis family. Despite being the smartest person in the Marquis family, due to Venian's tricks, the lower half of his body was paralyzed. To find the healing power for himself, he searched, rummaged through all kinds of books. And among them, there was an ancient inscription he found by chance at an antique bookstore. Because it was an ancient language, it was difficult to translate, but thanks to his efforts, he translated some words. Regenerate, Stone Tower. Those two keywords became the clue. Taylor immediately headed to the city of Stone Towers, Puzzle. Kale's purpose of coming to Puzzle City this time was also to obtain that ancient power. To implement the power of the indestructible shield he currently possessed. Although stealing Taylor's last chance was a bit of a bitch, Kale needed it more than he did. On the other hand, even if he possessed that power, it wouldn't have any effect on his crippled body. Taylor only knew that that power could increase vitality and have the ability to regenerate. However, what he didn't know was that it had no effect on a body that was already injured. Therefore, when she learned that truth, Taylor was very disappointed and was still killed by Venian in the end. As he was constantly thinking, the cats began to frantically tell Kale about the new information they heard from Hans. That if you come and say your wish to the tower, it will come true. They wanted Kale to go there with them. It wasn't that difficult, but when he heard the cats wanted to wish the dragon they rescued would accompany them, Kale immediately put aside the thought of wanting to go there. At that moment, the carriage stopped. They arrived at today's campsite. The next morning, Kale stared at the deer carcass that was placed at the edge of the campsite. It must have been hunted. Hans reported to Kale, who was staring at the deer carcass. Someone left it at the campsite. Hans pointed to the side of the deer carcass. Kale was also looking at that place. On the ground, there were drawings of spoons and forks. It seems that the person who left the deer carcass can speak but can't write. Kale had a bad premonition. Turned to look at Choi Han. He was smiling suspiciously. Choi Han was on guard last night, obviously knowing who did it but pretending that he didn't know. This made him think of that dragon. Well, he had to pretend that he didn't know. But it was too good to be true. The next times they camped, Kale received new food ingredients. Wild boar, rabbit, and many other fruits. Kale was sure about the dragon following him. Contrary to his mood, Choi Han is quite amused. He also thought that its actions were cute. And it proved that the dragon was still a child without losing his purity. Kale thought to himself, if Choi Han knew that the dragon could blow away a mountain, he wouldn't say that. Because it was imprisoned, the dragon should be disgusted with humans. Not to mention when it gets stronger, it will teach the Marquis a lesson. Kale had been looking forward to that. Only then will the Hennedes territory be more peaceful. They finally reached Puzzle City. The cats and Choi Han seemed to be very interested in the architecture here. In front of each house, there were small stone towers. Hans led K-Uyn to an inn. That was where they would spend the next few days. Since they came before the Stone Tower Festival, the room rate is not too high. K-Uyn didn't care. He noticed something strange about this place. It was not a place where there were many stone, but there were many stone towers. Hans knew the answer. Behind it was a tragic story that had been handed down to this day. The story took place in ancient times. At that time, this city was abandoned by the gods. Hearing this, K-Uyn couldn't help but be surprised, as this was something he had never seen described in the novel. This city was abandoned by the gods in a period of time. People also didn't know why the city was abandoned by the gods. It's just that at that time, people started to gather and build stone towers. That was how they sent their wishes. But sadly, prayers did not reach the gods. That was why there was no temple in Puzzle City. After all, gods had abandoned them, so there was no need for them to worship gods. From then on, the stone tower became a promise. A promise between people, and also a promise to themselves. The person who fulfills his wish will destroy his own tower. What an interesting city. After all, humans abandoned by gods, if they want to fulfill their wishes, they must use their own strength. The act of destroying the tower implied a kind of difficulty overcoming. K-Uyn was very pleased with that act of destruction. Although it was sad to be abandoned by the gods, the story was full of hope. K-Uyn liked that story, but the cats didn't. So after hearing Hans's story, they were extremely angry. Because he told them about the Tower of Wishes, gave them hope, and now he broke that hope. It was all a lie, so it was natural to be angry. Seeing them were angry, Hans just assumed that they were hungry, so he asked permission to go out to get food. Only the cats and Ron were left in the room now. "Is Mr. Choi Han leaving in 2 days?" "Yes," K-Uyn replied nonchalantly, and at his sudden thought, he smiled and asked, "You don't like that? You want to go with him?" Ron's gentle smile became even more fake. "How can I leave behind the young master and leave? I have to stay by the young master's side." K-Uyn got goosebumps. Ron continued, "It's just that I feel sorry and think how good it would be if Choi Han could travel with us. Before he left, I must have talked to him more. Beakrox would have regretted it." But Ron's words brightened K-Uyn's face a little. While he was annoying without noticing that Ron, Beakrox, Choi Han also developed some feelings for each other. K-Uyn thought about his plan, and then with a sly smile, he hinted at, "When we reach the capital, you three should meet up more often, since you're going to travel together after all. And so you three will leave this kingdom and go to Rosalind's kingdom." "So? Is it good?" K-Uyn hid the back part, then smiled slyly, and Ron smiled even more kindly, then replied, "When we come to the capital, will everyone be together? It's something to look forward to. Everyone coming to the capital safely is this old man's wish." K-Uyn did not believe this word. Looking forward to it. Coming there safely? This old man was not the one who could have those feelings. K-Uyn exhaustedly dismissed Ron, who was smiling kindly, outside. He began to drift off into contemplation again. The vitality of the heart. That power was in the place where the stone tower that the wish its owner was still unfinished. In the novel, it said that he lived 150 years. After living out his natural lifespan, he died of aging and left behind this power. He considered his powers as a curse. K-Uyn stood up and adjusted his clothes. Just as he opened the door, Hans arrived, with cat food in hand. K-Uyn told Hans that he was going to see the stone tower with Choi Han and the 2 cats. According to the original, that man who lived to 150 years old chose to build a stone tower at the convergence of the wind. It took him 100 years of hard work to build the stone tower, but in the end could not complete. After all, what did he wish for? It wasn't something that K-Uyn cared about either. It was just that K-Uyn had one thing in mind when he went to see the stone tower. He would build the stone tower in a monumental way. K-Uyn, 2 cats, Choi Han and Hans arrived at the stone tower in the hot sun. And then, Right at the entrance to the ruins, he saw two important people, a woman and a man in casual clothes. It's just that the man was in a wheelchair. The girl was pushing the wheelchair from behind. They were walking out of the entrance that was also the exit of the ruins. That man, none other than Taylor, the eldest son of the Marquis Stan. And the girl beside him was the priest Cage. Cale just wanted to see the place where the stone tower was, but unexpectedly met them two here. What he knew about them was only from their external description. Cale began to silently observe. The reason Taylor and Cage were here was because Cage wanted to confirm if what she had heard was bullshit or the truth. All these nights she had been dreaming the same dream. God told them to quickly go to the stone tower area because their future benefactor would appear there. And in the future, what that person will do, even God don't know that. Taylor wondered, is there someone that even God can't predict? Cage didn't know either, but she didn't believe in God, so she always assumed that what God said was half bullshit. Taylor advised Cage to keep her mouth shut. On the other hand, she also needed to pay attention because hearing God speak was a secret. Saying this made Cage even more angry. There's no temple in this puzzle, and no matter what you say, God doesn't feed us. And if God says that there will be benefactors, can you believe it? Speaking of food, I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat.